Hey, I'm Jay Martin, and somebody on the channel had requested kind of a quick run through of the different strengths and weaknesses of the different nations. So you probably don't want to watch this if you know what you're doing, but if you're a newer player, you might want to run through that. So here we go. I'm going to try to make this brief yet informative. So the three best countries in the game, call those the major nations, are Great Britain, Prussia, and France. And the quality of these nations is just of higher quality than the other nations. And Prussia and Great Britain are pretty similar. The real strength for Prussia is their light infantry unit. This Prussian Fusilier here is the second best light infantry unit in the game. And a couple assumptions when I get into this. The first is that the most standard rule is no artillery and 5 light infantry, or even if you have artillery, there's a cap of 5 light infantry. So I'm assuming that you're playing under that rule. And actually, before I continue, let me give you just two simple rules to play by. First rule, never bring 125 units. Never bring, like the Jaeger here, or rifle, or skirmisher. Never bring 125s. 100 range units are generally better. You get a little better at the game. You can maybe mix in a Jaeger unit on a particular map or whatever, but for now, don't bring them. And the second rule I want to say is bring somewhere from 2 to 4 cav. Never bring more than 4 cav. Never bring less than 2. So just kind of general rules. Again, you'll get into situations or maps where you want to break that, but when you're kind of starting out or whatever, use somewhere from 2 to 4 cav. Okay, so given those assumptions, if you play as Prussia, the best way to play as Prussia is you want 5 of these Prussian Fusiliers. They're the second best light infantry unit in the game. And then Prussia has some pretty decent line. They're not the best line in the game, but they are, let's call it above average. Or maybe average, whatever. So that's the regular musketeer unit there. And then Prussia has foot guards. And guard units are very good if you can get a hold of them. And then another strength of Prussia is that their Lancer unit is very cheap. It only costs 570. So a pretty standard build for Prussia would be the 5 lights, and then 6 musketeers, 2 foot guards, and then 6 lancers. And you could play around with this and mix and match, but that might be a standard way to play Prussia. Prussia, most players don't bring as much cav as this, and that's probably wise. So, you could do something like bring another musketeer and a militia, and then some cav. So that's kind of maybe how you play Prussia. Great Britain is similar to Prussia with a few distinctions. Their light infantry is the third best in the game. It's very close in quality to Prussia, so you're going to want 5 of those. Again, no rifles. GB has a bunch of options for the different line infantry. They have good guards. You can bring up to 5, 6 guards if you want. I generally don't play with guards that much when I play, so that's not really how I roll. But the real strength of Great Britain is their line infantry here is some of the best line infantry. It's actually the best regular line infantry in the game. The only weakness is their morale's a little low, so you want to make sure to keep your general alive. And the real strength of Great Britain is their infantry is good. So when I play Great Britain, I generally bring a lot of infantry and just a handful of cav. And a standard build for me would be something like this: 2 militia and then 2 dragoons. I really prefer the heavy cav dragoons over the light dragoons. These units, the light dragoon units they're not as good as lancers. You don't have a whole lot of options to use them effectively, so I prefer the heavy cav. It gives you better options. So that might be it, and we have some money left over. We can pop some chevrons on our militia. And this right here is a pretty strong build. Maybe requires a little more skill to use effectively because you don't have that much cav, but I like that build for Great Britain. France is a more unique nation for a couple reasons. First, because they're the kind of flagship nation of the game, based on Napoleon, which is fine. But they have a lot of units, so you have more options. The kind of weird thing about France is their light infantry is different than other nations. They have 2 light infantry units. This chasseur is a direct parallel to the lights from Prussia and GB, but the problem is this chasseur unit sucks. So don't use that. What you should use again is this Voltigeur unit. This is a little weird. It's kind of like the rifle units from the other nations, but they only have a range of 100. The real strength of this Voltigeur unit is that they're really hard to kill. They spread out, and you'll notice that they take more shots before they die for some reason. So Voltgear is good for that. But because there's only 60 of them, you can't just have a shootout with the opponent's lights. So playing France forces you to be a little more aggressive or wean your reliance on light infantry. This real strength of France is this Old Guard unit. It is the best unit in the game. It's called the Fear ability, but it lowers the morale of enemy units. The Guard Seaman is a very good unit, expensive. I think that the Young Guard unit is a little overpriced for its value. A regular GB line has, I think, pretty much the same accuracy and reload stats of it. It has better morale, but I don't think it's worth the money. And then they have some other options for line infantry. This Polish unit's really good. The Swiss unit is similar. The other real strength of France is their cav is the best cav in the game, pretty much. This Lancer unit here is quite good. Their shooter cav unit is really fucking good. So France they're weak in light infantry, but they're strong in their guard infantry and their cav. So if you want to play as France, you're probably going to wind up in a situation kind of like I have here, where you run out of money before you can get your full 20 units, but that's okay. That's kind of a reality of playing France. You get higher quality units, but at the expense of quantity. So if you want to play as France, definitely I recommend bring the 3 Old Guard no matter what. You'd be amazed at how many games you win just because at the end of the game you still got an Old Guard left. And the other guy's army is kind of exhausted, and then Old Guard wins, man. I mean, they fucking win. If you got the best unit in the game, you're going to want to use them. That's kind of what you want to do. Okay, so those are the major factions. The remaining nations are kind of referred to as minor factions. They're just overall a little weaker than those 3. My favorite of the minor nations is Ottoman, and they're the most unique unit in the game, or faction in the game. The reason for that is they have these melee infantry units here that don't have firearms or guns. They just have swords. And you have the Janissary and the Bashi Bazooka. And I really like these units. I recommend when you play with melee infantry, you put a lot of chevrons on them. It improves their stats, and these units are pretty cheap, so you can generally afford to do it. One thing I really like about Ottoman is that they're cheap enough that you can afford to bring a 9-star general a lot of times. And a build that I've been using a lot lately are two militia and then 6 line, and I set them up like this, so I got a militia in front of these line guys. And I like to bring 4 bazooks, 2 Bashi, and then a bunch of shooter cav. The Prussian heavy cav, the Prussian Lancers are really good too. They're comparable to France's cav, a little more expensive, but the Ottoman heavy cav and Lancers right there, the Sifi and the Sitar, I don't know how you pronounce that, but they're quite good. I like this build because I can afford to put chevrons. I have like $2,000 left over, so I can chevron up my Janissaries. And so I like with Ottomans you get the combination of a 9-star general and then a lot of chevrons in your units is what I like to do with them. And some players, I generally play with more melee infantry than other players. Other players don't use the melee infantry as much. Like Z Bishop, I know, for instance, doesn't. But that's kind of how I roll. That's how I like to do it. Austria, a very popular nation. Austria is kind of weird. They have kind of a combination of the qualities of GB and then a couple of their own strengths. This Grenzer unit is the line infantry that you want to use. Don't ever use this Old Guard expensive Jagger. Don't ever do that. The only tricky thing about Austrians is they have 2 kinds of line infantry. They have the German Fusilier and the Hungarian Fusilier. A Hungarian Fusilier is better at melee attack. They have better melee stats, and that's why they're more expensive. So if you plan on being in melee, you want the Hungarian. Lately, this is kind of funny, but Kraz has been bringing this army. If you do the math, the German Fusilier costs exactly 700, so 20 of them spends all your money. So Kraz has been fucking around and bringing this army lately, which is kind of fun. And the strength of Austria is that their units are kind of cheap, and their Lancer here, it's called the Ulan. That's a Lancer cav, and it's pretty cheap, so a lot of players like Austria because they can bring the expensive general and still fill out a field of full 20 units. They put an expensive general and then bring, like 6 Lancers or something like that, and you can cause some real trouble with that. So that's the strength of Austria. Their Grenzer unit is decent, and everything about Austria is kind of decent. They're kind of like the middle of the road army is kind of a way to look at it, but they're fun to play with. Portugal, the strength of Portugal is they have the best light infantry in the game. And on maps like grassy flatlands and a 3v3 where light infantry can be a real decisive factor, a lot of people go Portugal just because of these cazadores here. Their line infantry is actually better than you'd think. It's kind of on par with Prussian line infantry, actually. The real weakness of Portugal, however, they have the worst cav in the game. They have the shittiest cav in the game. So, you put some chevrons on your Portuguese cav or whatever. I have a theory that a lot of players in this game are over-reliant on light infantry, which makes Portugal more popular than it should be. I don't really use light infantry that much. So, if you really like light infantry, Portugal is a good way to go. Spain is kind of like a poor man's Great Britain. It's maybe on par with Austria. The neat thing about Spain is they have these guerrilla units that can deploy anywhere in the field. You're probably familiar with this. So if you want to use guerrillas, which are nice for a trick every now and then be Spain. Otherwise, they're kind of like, meh, They do everything okay. But they have lanceros, quality cav unit. And so that's Spain. Russia. The real reason to use Russia is if you're playing an artillery game, you bring the 20-pounder unicorn, which completely kicks ass. But if you're not playing with artillery, the strength of Russia is their units have its resistance to cold. So if you're playing on a map with snow on it, like Austerlitz or Austrian Pinnacles, they don't fatigue due to the cold temperature a bit. Their militia unit is better than average. It has better melee stats, so you might want to use it there. The other thing with Russia is you can bring 5 guards. They have the special Semenovsky lifeguard and then the regular lifeguard of foot. Their shooter cav is pretty good. That's that guy, mounted rifle. And then their Cossack cav is like a militia lancer, which is really cheap, and you can actually get some good value out of this unit. But you want to be aware that they have low morale and use them appropriately. So in the hands of a good player, Russia can be kind of interesting. I know a couple really good players like to use Russia against France, and they do a lot of melee attack. And apparently, I've never done this, and I've never tried the strategy, but apparently if you play it right, you can use Russia against France fairly well. So maybe I'll try to figure out how they do that and put a video about that. But that's how you want to use Russia. What's left, Sweden, is one of my favorite factions. The interesting part about Sweden is their light infantry is complete ass, these Jaggers right here. So what it really encourages you to do when you're playing as Sweden is to just use no light infantry. And so I just bring a couple militia. And my standard build for them is 5 line and 4 guards. And then their best unit is this mounted Jaeger right there. And so I'll probably do like 8 mounted cav, 2 militia, and then 9 line. And this is a really good 1v1 grassy build, actually. You can fuck people up if you do this right. Maybe a little higher level of skill, but maybe that's because you just don't get a camp behind your lights. So it forces you to be a little more active, and I think this is a good build, especially against players that are really reliant on their light infantry. You can fuck up one of those, like fake 9-star players that really isn't 9-star good. They just, won it through grinding games against other light infantry players. So if you're 1v1 in grass against like a 9-star player who thinks they're good, this is actually kind of a good army to bring against them. So that's how you want to play Sweden. Ignore their light infantry. And I think rounding things out, we have Denmark, which is nothing real exciting about them. The only thing I'll say about Denmark is this Lifeguard horse unit is actually really, really good. It's one of the better cav units in the game. So if you bring Denmark, you might want to try to squeeze a couple of these guys in there, but otherwise they're not that interesting. They try to trick you by having all these different 125 units. None of them are really that good. I actually prefer the basic Jagger against the sharpshooter or the ski troop. But, be creative if you play Denmark. I wouldn't use their lights, but if you're on like a map like Linny or Arkelay, you can use them to some success, but really not my flavor. But that's where Denmark's really not exciting. You pretty much just play Denmark if you want to fuck around and get some style points for playing as Denmark. And last up, the worst nation of the game is the United Netherlands. They're kind of like a poor man's Great Britain. They kind of have exactly the same units as Great Britain, but worse all across the board. The one thing I'll say about the Dutch, the neat thing about them is this Carabiner heavy cav unit here. is for dollar, I think the best cav unit in the game. It only costs 780, and you get a really high quality unit out of it. So if you play Dutch, you might want to try to squeeze some of these guys in, similar to the Live Gorda horse from Denmark. But I think this is the best dollar for dollar cav unit in the game. Maybe the Russian Cossack cav is on par with that in terms of economy, but this is a really good unit that is pretty cheap. Their Hussar, their light cav unit is quite good as well. So that, you know, maybe a couple of these, couple of those. But that's how you want to play Netherlands. You kind of get style points for using Netherlands in general because they suck. So if you can play a game and win as Netherlands, that's, you know, a double win. And style points for playing as United Netherlands is how it goes. So if you play Netherlands and win, good for you. Well, just to recap, if you're just starting out, the three best nations of the game, strength-wise, are Great Britain, France, and Prussia. So, you know, start playing with them. And what I recommend you do if you're starting out is I would play the same nation a bunch of games in a row, like play 20 or 30 games all as Prussia, and maybe tweak it, and you'll get a feel for how their units, you know, what are you doing with that army successfully, and spend some time thinking about that. How are you using the units? How are you using them successfully? And once you feel you got a handle on it, then try a different nation. For instance, if you're playing well, the playstyle you're going to use is France is a lot different than the playstyle you're going to use as Prussia, and there's a lot of little subtleties between the strengths of the nations. And one thing I notice is that really good players can play each nation effectively. I know a lot of players who think they're good but are actually quite bad, is that they just play the same nation over and over and over. And I think the mark of a really good player is they can use different builds and different tactics based on those builds in a lot of different situations. And that's, to me, the mark of a really elite player. I know there's a lot of people out there who think they're good but aren't, because they're kind of one-dimensional. They use the same general tactics, they use the same general build, and I'll notice really good players can be flexible in how they do it. One game they'll have Sweden with no lights, the next game they'll be Great Britain with 5 lights and the low cav. So that's kind of what I recommend you do. When you start, play the same nation until you really get a handle on how it works, and then move on and try different things and become a well-rounded player. And that's part of what makes this game fun, honestly, is being able to do different shit. If you do the same build and the same tactics over and over and over, it's kind of boring. So anyway, that's a quick intro. And if you're a newer player, I hope that gives you a direction. What I would do, if you're a new player, I would do this build right here. Be Prussia. Bring 5 lights. Bring 6 musketeers. 2 foot guards, a militia, and these lancers. Put some chevrons on your militia, and maybe some chevrons on one of your lancers, something like that. But I would, if you're a new player, bring 5 lancers, a militia with some chevrons, 8 line, and 5 lights, and that's what I would do. So anyway, good luck playing, and I'll catch you in the next video.